America has come under terrorist attack as never before, with the destruction of the World Trade Center in New York and other attacks on the Pentagon and State Department in Washington. Who could have done it? My guest today is the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak. Is the outrage in the US linked to the crisis in the Middle East? Ehud Barak, a very warm welcome to the program. Who could have possibly given the order for an attack on this scale?
Most probably, if I can guess, is a bin Laden organization or something of similar nature.
They have the capacity to order an attack and carry it out on this scale, multi-locations inside the United States?
Yeah, they have, and we see the painful results of this capability.
But there's never been anything like it before.
Yeah, there had never been, but we are facing a growing wave of terror. Our hearts and souls are now with the American people and its leadership, and the devastating, painful kind of consequences. But it is clear for several years that a mounting wave of terror should be tackled with, and I believe, my judgment is that the only way to do it is by treating it the way our forefathers dealt with the piracy on the high seas, to see it as it really a global threat to our very way of life, to coordinate globally diplomatic, intelligence and operational activities.
Yes, but we have open borders on a scale we never had when your forefathers were counteracting piracy.
Our forefathers just set a clear-cut rule, namely pirates cannot land at any port or at any airport for this matter, and whoever is ready to host them is automatically isolating himself from the community of the world.
Mr. Barak, that's easy to say, but what this proves is that even the most powerful nation on earth is capable of being attacked by terrorists. Nobody is safe. You talk about the development of terrorism over the years, but this takes it onto a new plane, doesn't it?
Our whole civilization is...
This is war, isn't it?
Highly vulnerable to terrorist attacks as a result of its sophistication. It's clear, there is a clear need to launch a globally coordinated war against terror and its sources, and I believe that it should be led by the United States, the UK, Europe, and Russia, and I emphasize, and Russia.
Why? Why do you emphasize on Russia?
Since they are fighting with terror by themselves, Central Asia is a source of terror. They face it in Moscow and as well as in Ferganskaya Dolina, and I know how deeply President Putin is committed to the struggle against terror.
Did you have any idea, though, having talked about the growing wave of terrorism, that any organization could have mounted something as audacious as this in the United States?
It's clear that it's happened in front of our eyes.
But did you have any warning?
No, I don't think
that something on this scale was being prepared?
I don't think that something of this exact nature had been kind of predicted, but we should bear in mind that there was already an attempt to explode the World Trade Center years ago. There was already an attempt to break or to explode the Holland Tunnel leading to Manhattan. And the threats were there, but such magnitude and coordination, simultaneous act, I don't believe had been predicted.
Yasser Arafat has been very quick to condemn this action. How much can this be attributed to the failure of the peace process, what we've seen in the United States?
I don't think that it's directly linked to the failure of the peace process.
Is it linked at all?
I don't know, we will have to wait and see, but I think that Arafat, which is right to condemn it, is personally responsible for a new wave of terror in the world, more than
personally
most
responsible
people.
for this?
No, not for this, of course, but for the wave of terror that we have seen in the last 20 years and the last few years. I believe that he's kind of participating in encouraging and promoting terror. I do not want to link him in any way to this very attack on the United States, but in a way...
You're blaming him for creating a climate in which terror is acceptable.
Yeah,
is that what you're saying?
Yeah, he had not just been created the climate, he was participating for years, and even in the last few months in organizing, coordinating, and encouraging terror attacks against Israel. But it should not necessarily do something to do with the attack on the United States.
Don't you bear, then, if he bears responsibility for creating the climate, Israel also bears responsibility for giving the green light to terror, to handing the veto on the peace process to terrorists and Islamic extremists? Aren't you responsible for that as well?
No, I don't
you
think
bear
so.
some of the responsibility for this?
I think that what really happened in the last 2 years in the Middle East was that for the first time in the history of the conflict, an offer was put on the table well within the conventional wisdom about, world conventional wisdom about 242, 338, how it should be solved.
You're talking about Camp David. You're talking about Camp David.
I'm talking about
Last
Camp David.
July.
Last July, the American president suggested it, offered, we were ready to take it as a basis for negotiation. Arafat refused to take it even as a basis
this
for negotiation.
This is what the Palestinians call the big lie, isn't it? That you offered everything and that they turned it down. They call this the big lie.
And turned deliberately to terror and violence.
Mr. Barak,
it's not a...
Mr. Barak, they call it the big lie. Robert Malley, who was a senior US diplomat who was there at the time, says it wasn't the dream offer it was made out to be. There were concessions. Both sides went further than they ever had before. There were concessions on both sides. You cannot sit here and just blame Arafat for turning down the biggest, best offer that was ever made to him, because it wasn't like that.
It was clearly exactly like that for the first time.
But the Americans are saying it wasn't.
It's not. Listen very carefully to other American voices.
What's wrong with Robert Malley? He was there. He's a senior diplomat.
Sandy Berger, his superior, and Dennis Ross, and even the president himself, and Madeleine Albright. Robert Malley wrote an article together with one of the Palestinian architects, Hussein Ara, and turned a little bit to gossipize history.
What do you mean gossipize history? He said the Palestinians made key concessions that no Arab party to talks with you had ever made before.
They didn't.
They accepted Israeli annexation of West Bank territory to accommate settlements.
They didn't.
That was key, wasn't it? They accepted the principle of Israeli sovereignty.
Let me tell you a few words one by one. There were several kind of allegations that had been revised in the history of this story. One is the story that we have tried to create Bantustans to cut the contiguity of the West Bank with settlements. Not true. When we were ready to contemplate getting maybe just 10% of the area of the West Bank, or maybe even less, it means that the rest of the 90 or 92 or 94% are inevitably contiguous. This is a lie that they are telling their people in order to avoid serious Palestinians from questioning the very approach of Arafat.
Now, Mr. Barak, isn't the problem that there was no trust at Camp David between you and Arafat? You wanted this summit, Arafat didn't. He said that the negotiations were not sufficiently prepared to go into a summit. You hadn't carried out earlier promises. You had failed to withdraw troops from portions of the West Bank under the Y agreement. You had refused to hand over 3 Arab villages just outside Jerusalem. You hadn't lived up to your promises, so how could he trust you?
If you will have enough time to respond to it, I will respond to one by one. The idea of trying to achieve a kind of framework agreement before transferring more land is part of the Sharm el-Sheikh memorandum that was signed by Chairman Arafat, myself, the presence of Madeleine Albright and President Mubarak and King Abdallah. We never broke a single letter of our commitments where he broke the very basic condition of the whole, or assumption of the whole Oslo process, namely that nothing will lead us back to violence. Every issue should be solved only around the negotiation.
Mr. Barak, one of the key assumptions of the Oslo process was that settlements would not be expanded. Under you, settlements were expanded.
No.
They say that the Palestinians say that you expanded more settlements, had more people living in settlements than Benjamin Netanyahu.
It's another lie. We did not establish
not a lie, your own
a
Peace
single,
Now.
not even a single settlement had been established under
Peace
my...
Now have the statistics.
Yeah.
Your own organization,
No,
Israeli
I
organization,
will
Peace
put
Now, have the
facts
statistics.
exactly in place. We did not establish a single new settlement.
No, you expanded the existing ones.
We erased many outposts that the settlers created.
In 7 years, you only got rid of 4 settlements.
Within few days of their establishment. And it's true that some of the heavily populated Israeli cities and settlements had been built or expanded, not expanded in area, but expanded in volume and population as a result of contracts that had been signed before we came to power. We are a state of law and we respect it. But let me tell you, since for the first time in the history of the conflict, we were ready to put an end to it and to dismantle many settlements in exchange for end of the conflict. I told Arafat more than once, why the hell it bothers you that we are keep building? If we are building in a place that will ultimately become part of Israel under an agreement, you shouldn't care.
It did bother them. You knew it bothered them. You can ask why it bothered them, but you knew it did. Look, and even Shimon Peres criticized you for not understanding Arafat's psychology over this.
If a building is built in a settlement that will ultimately be part of an area under your responsibility, why should you bother?
Now, let me tell you. Mr. Barak, you called a summit. Why did you not negotiate with him face to face?
I negotiated with him many times.
Why at the summit?
I talked to him many times.
Not at this summit. Not at this summit.
Let me follow your question one by one. The problem was not negotiation between myself and him before a real sense of a breakthrough, a readiness to contemplate, to take the president's ideas as a basis for negotiation had emerged. It's not national interests of historic dimensions are not about psychology of leaders. Menachem